Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to just have an effortless sex life? One where having sex wasn't this ever-looming issue or something that needs to be tiptoed around, but where sex is something that is enjoyable, mutually pleasurable, and desired by both you and your husband? Today, I'm going to share the number one tip for how to bridge that gap between sex being difficult to sex being effortless. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I'm a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. And today we are talking about the one thing that can revolutionize your sex life that you can start doing today. But before we get into that, I'm going to tell you a quick story. Angela and her husband Mitch had been married for 3 years. They started out their marriage with a lot of misunderstanding about church teaching, especially around NFP and contraception. About 6 months into their marriage, they started learning more about the beauty of theology of the body and what the church teaches about sex being a way for humans to image God. They stopped using contraception and started reading some books about the Catholic Church's teaching, and they started talking about sex a little bit. Sex became so much more than a physical act to them now. They saw the richness in how two become one flesh and the depth of what John Paul II has to say in his theology of the body. They were hooked and they loved it. But sex was still really hard. And now it seemed even harder. Sex was such a big deal. Sex was imaging God. It was holy. It was a prayer. Angela and Mitch felt like they had to come into sex perfectly. They both started holding each other to unreasonable standards. Angela expected Mitch to be so careful about ever objectifying her. Whenever he spoke of her body and said something like, "Oh, you're looking so hot today," she felt like he was going back into the old times when sex was just an act and a means to the end of pleasure for him, not a holy and sacred act. Angela and Mitch were starting to question every single thing they did during sex. Is me touching her here using her for my own pleasure? Is him kissing me there appropriate for something so holy? Should I even wear lingerie anymore? Is this putting my husband in a near occasion of sin? Is it making it too easy for him to objectify me? Initiation became a silent affair, because both were worried about saying something that would now make the act unholy. Sex itself was silent and reserved. Both worried that they were going to do something wrong. Sex started to happen less often, until it was only 1 to 2 times a month at best. Angela and Mitch were so afraid of doing something wrong and sinning in some way that they actually began to avoid the act or just very rarely came together. Sex became so much harder than it was before they learned about all the goodness and the beauty. But why is that? Why did sex become harder once they learned about how good and beautiful it was? See, Angela and Mitch fell into a trap that Christians in the Middle Ages fell into with the Eucharist. Very few Christians received Jesus in the Eucharist during the Middle Ages because they knew that the Eucharist was so good and so holy that they felt that they were wholly unworthy to receive. And this was just a total trap because those Christians weren't allowing Jesus to come into them and heal their unworthiness by actually receiving him in the Eucharist. See, Angela and Mitch became so worried that they would mess up with sex, that they would sin or objectify the other or somehow make the act unholy, that they began to subconsciously avoid it altogether. Sex became so serious to them that it became something that was almost feared. There was a fear that sex was this near occasion to sin. There was a fear of saying something that would take them down the wrong path. There was a fear of getting carried away in the moment and just going down a rabbit hole of sin. And there was also ultimately a mistrust between the spouses. A thought that something Angela did could lead Mitch to objectify her. She became so cautious in how she talked about sex and how she acted during sex. And ultimately, she wasn't enjoying it at all. And here's the thing. Sex is serious. It is a big deal. Sex is a way for two human beings to image God. That's a huge deal. Sex is the most efficacious way that grace enters the marriage covenant between husband and wife. Sex is not just a physical act for the sake of pleasure. Those are all very true statements. But sometimes if we dwell on that aspect too much, we get paralyzed. Sex becomes very difficult to navigate because we want to make sure we're doing it right. Sex becomes hard to talk about because we don't fully trust our spouse to not objectify us. Or maybe sex just becomes silent and reserved because we don't want to do anything wrong that would make us need to go to the confessional. So, how do we get out of this paralysis? We get out of it with fun. Yes, sex is a big deal. It's important. It's holy. It's so good. But it doesn't have to be so serious. Yes, we should absolutely treat it with reverence, but that doesn't mean that we need to act in the same way that we do at Mass, quiet, reserved, and prayerful. No, sex should be fun and light and enjoyable. So, how can we add in that fun? We can do things that actually make us laugh. Because what does laughter do? Laughter, it lightens moods, but it increases trust between two people. Laughter has a bonding effect. Laughter has a relaxing effect. And it opens us up to new ideas. So yeah, go get the whipped cream and lay a bunch of towels down. Play strip poker or strip Monopoly or whatever board game you like. Play games like Pinch No Smiling while not wearing any clothes. And if you don't know what that game is, I will link it in the show notes. Grab a list of ridiculous pickup lines and start using them on your husband every day. Dress up in silly costumes and act out a funny scene. During foreplay, only talk in British accents. Or play Naked Twister. Put on some dance music and just do a dance party. Or better yet, attempt to learn a choreographed dance together and then laugh about how bad you are. Draw each other. Paint me like one of your French girls. Nobody else needs to see the drawings. Because here's the thing. Yes, sex is important and it's a big deal. But just because it's important and a big deal doesn't mean we need to be afraid of it. When we start adding fun into our sex life, the pressure is lifted off. And that pressure is what is making sex so difficult in marriages. Pressure from all sides. But the pressure that I'm talking about right now is that pressure of worrying about sin or worrying about doing something wrong. So when we lift that pressure off, things become a lot easier. It's not so serious. So, in conclusion, if your sex life is hard right now, if it's hard to talk about it, or maybe it's even become non-existent, or there's just something else going on, I want you to add some fun in. And even if your sex life isn't hard right now, if things are going amazing, try adding some fun in, because I bet it's going to get even better. Do something to make you both laugh. And I promise things are going to get easier with sex. And if you're wondering about my promise of how you can start doing this today, but you're sitting in a period of abstinence right now, you can absolutely add fun just generally into your marriage, and that is going to make your sex life easier. Because the more fun that you have, the more laughter that you have, the more trust that you have between you and your spouse, the more open you are to each other. And again, laughter has a bonding effect. So the more bonded you are together. So even if you're abstaining right now, you can add fun into your marriage today. And I'd suggest maybe those ridiculous pickup lines as a good place to start. Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.